For about 4 months, I could not finish a single book. I had 17 tabs open in my browser at all times. I had a reading list with 43 entries that I had been building for 2 years and had worked through exactly none of. I would sit down to write something, a plan, a reflection, anything, and within 6 minutes, I would be watching a YouTube video about a man who renovated a boat in rural Finland. I did not care about the boat, I did not care about Finland, but I watched it anyway. And then I watched the next away, and then 40 minutes had passed and I had not written a single word. This was 2 years ago. I was 26, living in a small apartment in Phoenix, working remotely for a company I was not excited about, telling myself I was a person who read books and thought carefully and had rich inner conversations with himself. I believed this about myself even as the evidence pointed in the opposite direction. My phone's screen time was averaging 4 hours and 40 minutes per day. Not 4 hours of reading or researching, 4 hours of scrolling through short form videos, opening Reddit threads I closed without reading, checking the same 3 apps in a loop that had no endpoint. Instagram, then Twitter, then my email, then Instagram again. Nothing had changed in the 2 minutes since I last checked. Nothing ever had, but I checked anyway. The thing that nobody talks about, honestly, is what this kind of behavior does to the interior of your mind. Not in a metaphorical sense, in a very literal, testable daily sense. I started to notice that I could not hold a thought for longer than a few seconds without reaching for my phone. Not because the phone had something I needed, but because the thought itself had become uncomfortable. Stillness had become uncomfortable. Any silence that lasted longer than 30 seconds felt like something was wrong. My brain had been trained, and I had trained it, to expect a new stimulus every few seconds. And when that stimulus did not arrive, it produced something that felt like low-grade panic. I remember sitting in a coffee shop in November, trying to think through a decision I had been avoiding for weeks. It was a real decision, the kind that required genuine consideration, the kind of thinking where you sit with discomfort and let ideas develop slowly before you act. I had a notebook in front of me, I had a pen in my hand. I sat there for 40 minutes and wrote 11 words. 11 words in 40 minutes. And not because I had nothing to say, I had plenty to say, but I could not hold the thought long enough to get it down before something else fragmented it. The mental bandwidth was gone, not tired, not blocked, just fragmented into 1,000 small pieces, none of which were large enough to be useful. I started calling it the static, that low-frequency noise that lived in the background of every moment of potential focus, the not-quite silence that made real thinking impossible. I had accumulated so much digital residue, so many half-watched videos, so many articles open in tabs I would never return to, so many group chats I was technically present in, so many notification preferences I had never reviewed, that my mind had no clean surface to work on. Every potential thought arrived already contaminated, already tangled with something I had seen 2 days ago, something I had half read on my lunch break, a tweet I had laughed at and then forgotten, but which had somehow lodged in the background of my processing. My mental workspace looked like my desktop. Hundreds of icons, no organization, no clear hierarchy, and a machine that ran noticeably slower as a result. The worst part was that it was entirely invisible. From the outside, I looked fine. I was functioning. I was having conversations, meeting deadlines, laughing at things that were funny. Nobody looks at a person and thinks his capacity for sustained thought is deteriorating. There's no blood test for that. There's no visible symptom. But inside, I knew something was wrong because I used to be able to think. I used to be able to sit with a problem and let it breathe and come back with something real. I used to finish books. I used to have ideas that felt original, that surprised me, that arrived from somewhere deep rather than from the surface of whatever I had consumed that morning. That person had gotten quieter and quieter, and I had barely noticed him leaving. So began the most deliberate and uncomfortable 3 months of my adult life. I deleted 12 apps from my phone in one afternoon. Not restricted them. I set screen time limits that I would override with a passcode within 48 hours. Deleted them. I closed every browser tab, all 17, without reading any of them. I unsubscribed from 41 email newsletters in a single sitting. I moved my phone to a drawer during working hours and did not retrieve it until after lunch. I bought a paper notebook and wrote in it every morning for 30 minutes before I opened a screen of any kind. I did not do any of this because I had read a productivity article that recommended it. I did it because I had run out of other explanations for why I felt so mentally thin. The first 2 weeks were genuinely miserable. I am not going to romanticize this. I sat at my desk and felt a crawling restlessness that I had never named before but recognized instantly a withdrawal. My hands wanted to reach for the phone. The silence felt enormous. The discomfort of sitting with thought, one problem, one page of one book, without relief, without distraction, without the escape hatch of a new stimulus, was almost physical. I moved my shoulders constantly. I got up to make tea I did not drink. I stared at walls, but after about 11 days, something unexpected happened. A thought arrived that I had not invited, long, fully formed, with its own internal logic. It concerned a problem I had been half thinking about for months, but had never been able to sit with long enough to develop. I wrote 3 pages in 35 minutes. Not good pages necessarily, but real ones, connected ones. Thoughts that followed each other without fragmenting. And when I finished, I sat back and realized I had been entirely absent from the world for 35 minutes in a way I had not been in longer than I could honestly remember. Not absent in the dissociated sense, absent in the absorbed sense. Present inside a single thing, which is, I now understand, what thinking actually is. The static had not disappeared entirely, but it had dropped in volume, and in the gap it left, something older and more useful had started to return. If you are out there and you have been telling yourself that you are simply busy, simply tired, simply not a person who finishes books or generates original ideas, I want you to consider the possibility that you are none of those things, that what you are is overstimulated, that the environment you have constructed around yourself, the one full of notifications and open tabs and infinite scrolling and group chats and autoplay and algorithmic recommendations, has slowly and quietly reduced your mind's ability to do the one thing minds are designed to do: to think, to hold an idea long enough to develop it, to sit in discomfort long enough to produce something real. The philosopher Blaise Pascal wrote in the 17th century that all of humanity's problems stem from man's inability to sit quietly in a room alone. He wrote this before smartphones, before the internet, before we had industrialized distraction into a 24-hour product delivered directly into our hands. If stillness was difficult then, the conditions we have created now are almost incomprehensible by comparison. Cal Newport, in his book Deep Work, makes the argument that the ability to focus without distraction is becoming simultaneously more rare and more valuable, which means the people who protect it, who are ruthless about what they allow into their mental space, will have an enormous advantage over everyone who does not. The clearing is not comfortable at first. Do not expect it to be. Delete the apps, close the tabs, give your mind a clean surface to work on for an uninterrupted hour every morning before the noise arrives. Read a book at a time and read it slowly. Protect your attention the way you would protect anything you cannot afford to lose, because deep thought is not a luxury. It is not a nice to have for intellectuals or academics. It is the capacity from which everything else that matters in your life will emerge: your decisions, your relationships, your work, your understanding of yourself. Digital clutter is quietly killing your ability to think deeply. The good news is that it is entirely reversible, but you have to choose to reverse it. Thank you so much for watching. If you want to join me on my journey and see more videos like this, please consider liking and subscribing. Have a great rest of your day.